Brand new in Ableton Live 7 is a compelling device called the drum rack. Now this is a further evolution of the basic instrument rack and the impulse kind of merged together. It creates a very powerful tool. Of course it's targeted for drums. We can tell that by the name. It's called a drum rack. But it is totally not limited to drum use whatsoever. Let's take our first look at a drum rack now. And if you're following along, I'm starting with an empty project. Now we're going to be using some audio samples that should be included on your project folder. I'm temporarily going to hide my Ableton Live so we can see this. Here's my projects folder on the desktop. Inside there is a folder called Resource. And in here we have a couple of PDFs with some shortcuts and keyboard commands, etc. But we also have a folder called Samples for Drum Rack. I'm going to copy that out onto my desktop for this project alone. So now I'm going back to Ableton Live. And let's see if we can resize this a little bit. There we go. So again, I'm going to add a new drum rack on this audio track of this new live set. So I'm going to double click on my browser for my devices, open up Instruments, and now grab Drum Rack. Now again, we've talked about all the instruments that are available within Ableton Live that are free. I've saved discussing the drum rack until after we covered regular racks, but it is indeed a free audio device for making sound within all versions of Ableton Live 7. Okay, so now I've got a drum rack, and immediately we're open up to a view of the drum rack down here. So we see over here a grid with multiple squares, and basically they cover one octave of notes up to C, and it starts at C1. Well, if we want to move to different octaves, we simply click and hold inside this square, and it moves up in the grid by octave jumps. So now we're basically C4 to C5 plus a few, and then I'm going to go for the middle, C3 up. Now it's very simple to create a drum rack. Simply all I have to do is open up my folder here with the samples. I'm going to go into column view just to clean this up a bit, and we'll take this and let's pull this over, and I'm just going to resize so we just basically get a view of the waveforms here. Now if I want a kick drum here on C3, actually I'll pull it back down to C1 for the kick drum and tab key over, and back to my samples. I'm going to take my kick drum sound, kick drum 01, and click and hold and drag it and drop it right on one of those pads. And immediately we have access to that sound. Over here, notice you can see MIDI's coming in and audio's coming out by the meters. Now one thing that happens as soon as we do that, I'm going to reactivate Ableton Live on top, is if we double click this, we can see that that has been created using the Simpler synthesizer. Now this means we have an incredible amount of control over the wave and the parameters. We have complete volume, filter, and pitch envelope generators. We can turn the filter on and choose from a wide variety of types. We can also turn on LFOs, engage filter envelope generators and pitch envelope generators. Just a complete suite of effects and controls on the parameters of the Simpler, available for each square within this grid, and it covers complete MIDI range or up to 128 notes. Very immense. Now look at this grid. We can tell that something is in this slot. It has a slightly different color. It may be very hard to see on a small movie, but there's a slight gray square right here. Let's continue now. I'm going to re-click on my folder and find a snare wave. I'm using my scroll wheel. I'm just going to pull and drop snare sound down on this square, and now we can hear that by clicking on its triangle or playing the corresponding note. Now notice as soon as we do this that if I hit the key softer or harder, we're not hearing any difference. So we can see it's being hit soft here and hard, but we're not hearing difference in the sound. So now I've got the kick drum selected. I can come over here and choose to have velocity affect the volume. And I'm going to do the same thing for the snare. So we're already seeing how these parameters are affecting our ability to shape the sound. Now listen to the short note of the snare. That's very unrealistic. So again, it's selected. I'm going to come over here to the release time and lengthen that out by clicking and holding. Now if I play short, I still get a shorter snare drum sound, but at about 900 milliseconds it's still believable. And if I hold it down, we get the longer drum sound. So we can see already how this philosophy of using the simpler to create a square device for each of these pads is just amazing. The parameters are immediately available. Let's engage the filter on the snare and just see what we've got there. I'm going to trigger it again from the keyboard and pull the cutoff frequency down. It's slightly muffled now. If I want to, I can create some resonance. Now it's actually pointing out or increasing the volume right where this frequency is. Let's turn it off. So we've completely changed the quality of the snare drum sound. Now you can continue dropping any samples you want on any and all of these 128 grids. It's amazing, the flexibility. In our next look at the drum rack, we're going to look at how we can combine sounds on the same pad.